Matthew 7, verses 15 through 20. Beware of false prophets, who will come to you all in sheep's clothing, but inside are rapacious wolves. By their fruits you will know them. Are grapes gathered from thorns, or from thistles, figs? Thus every good tree bears beautiful fruit, but the rotten tree bears wicked fruit. A good tree cannot bear wicked fruit, nor can a corrupt tree bear beautiful fruit. Every tree that does not bear beautiful fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus you will know them by their fruits. Please pray with me. God, you have placed choices before us since our beginnings. And some of the options you have given us help us to understand ourselves better. Sometimes we are given a chance to grow or to stay the same. Sometimes we are given a chance to be kind or to be cruel. Sometimes our options help us to know you better. Ageless God, you make us glad when we see, hear, experience your works, the life that you have brought forth from your own self. You are rich in mercy and in grace. All have been saved from death, raising us up together. Help us to follow the path that you have prepared for us. Open our eyes to see the good news lived out in the people around us. Let us share how the gospel has nurtured your spirit, dwelling in our hearts, in the ways that we treat one another, and in how we see the people that you have created here and around the world. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Who are the prophets? Where are the voices that speak into our world, telling us what's important? We have leaders like presidents, we have representatives and legislators who speak through voting, through debate. Is it the people who are meant to speak one another and debate issues and solutions and answers? Are those the voices that we hear about what's important? Who are the voices? Who are the people that emphasize, that raise up what's important for this nation and this world? Sometimes those we've elected do help us hear those voices. They represent us. They do those things. They actually lead and speak up for the things that are important, that we need to know. And other times we are led and influenced by those who don't have official recognition in the world. Whatever your opinion toward her, Greta Thunberg fits that unofficial designation, along with several other young people around the world in the past few years. Prophetic voices come to us from Canadian First Nations Autumn Peltier, a water protection advocate. Another one that I was looking for, Ella Mae Looney, is a member of the Confederated Tribes of the Yakima in the Washington, Oregon area, who is learning 3 languages spoken within her community and helping other Native youth do the same. Those voices are important. Those voices lift up, raise up vital things about their cultures and thus about this world. According to Jesus' description of false prophets and, by virtue of oppositeness, true ones, we can know about good news, about what is truth being spoken by what words and accompanying actions produce. Greta and Autumn have been instrumental in their particular realms of influence in raising awareness and inspiring action for the sake of protecting us all from the perils of a changing climate that will, within a generation, make living on Earth very dangerous, and also from the equally dangerous loss of safe and abundant drinking water. Autumn has lifted up the importance that the loss of safe water is life-ending not only for indigenous people and not only for people, but for life as we know it. Ella Mae Looney is not as well known as these others. It's a narrower place of influence, but hers and other advocacy for the preservation of native languages has the benefit of preserving and protecting cultural values and activities that have the potential to help all people. Most indigenous cultures have over the centuries understood the importance of protecting resources for the sake of long-term survival of all living things. While often the dominant culture most of us have been taught and live with, which might be different individually, but overall culture has taught us that resources are supposed to be used and are often used up without much thought. So using the descriptions that Jesus uses to define good, green, and rotten trees, who is producing the good fruit? And who is producing the increasingly wicked fruit in our world? Now, I'm aware that we might not have or want a big stage like national leadership or use what these particular young people have done advocating and taken action for the sake of the entire planet, but we have a place of influence. What is it that we do and have done that indicates who we are as God's beloved people, who indicates how we identify with being God's beloved people? Recently, a friend told the story of how they had examined their life over the years, looking back with an understanding of how God's love had encouraged them to unfold an ever-developing understanding of their identity and how their faith was to be lived out. They began in one faith story, they moved to another, and as they understood more and more about themselves, they landed within the disciples of Christ. But all of those pieces were important and are a part of who they are today. Within the story they tell is their growing understanding of God's justice and how they advocate for others who have known injustice, and therefore how we can advocate for one another when we see the wrong things that happen, as Jesus calls them, the wicked fruit. As I've listened to your stories and other people's stories, I know that as children, each of us has experienced times that made us aware of how poverty affects the lives of children and adults differently. As children, if we had enough to eat and a place to sleep, we might not have known we were poor. Then when we got older, we might be more aware of our particular circumstance and be aware of how little there really was when we were children. That the difficulties that might have faced our parents and other adults in our lives, we began to be aware of how hard it was for them. We may have realized that they protected us from the worst if they could. We may have come to see how their frustration might have made us feel badly sometimes without us knowing why. And we can take what we learned in those moments, both the mercy and the difficulty, and share what we've learned and live out what we've learned. If we learned that our families and other families' poverty wasn't their fault, we probably also learned that communities stuck together to make sure that people were cared for. We may have also seen where communities failed to care for each other and learned from those things as well. We learn a lot about values from our families and the extended community around us, both good and bad. Our families and our parents often, not always, but often teach us about love and how we care for one another. And sometimes, though, we miss out on what's helpful and get what's harmful. But without necessarily assigning blame, some of our communities and families gave us misconceptions about how the world works with regard to racial relations, gender roles, identity, how we express anger and frustration. I think it's important to understand that our parents were probably trying their best, even if we learned things that we feel like were very difficult as we got older. In a statement attributed to Dr. Maya Angelou, she said, "Do the best you can, and when you know better, do better." So there is still responsibility and accountability for those ideas, and particularly actions carrying out hateful ideas and things. So if we learn from what we know is better, then we can carry on a legacy that is better. Each of us has the opportunity to be the person that God has created us to be. I think this is one of the reasons for an attitude of grace and forgiveness, not only toward others, but toward ourselves. We can be aware that we are truly God's beloved and seek to come closer to that identity better over time, while being aware that we won't always just get better every day. We may get stuck, we might go the wrong way, and yet grace, mercy, and God's love will always call us back to go the right direction. We don't have to have a pulpit or a national stage to be who God has made us to be. And we don't always have to be the same every day to be faithful to who we are either. Who we are changes. As children, we follow our calling by learning what we can about ourselves and our place. As we grow, we find different roles that define us. We are students, some are athletes or artists or musicians. And sometimes we retain those roles for a lifetime or as long as we can. And then some become parents, learning from and teaching children and growing alongside them. Some then someday become grandparents. We may be aunts or uncles or cousins and have roles to play there. We have friendships that help us live into who we are. We learn and we grow into jobs and careers. We serve our community, our country. Wherever we live, we serve friends and strangers close by and far away, and we bring those experiences that we've had through our entire life, informing what we do and how we help. We can look around and possibly inside and see the kinds of lives that at least sometimes bear a little wicked fruit. When hatred rules life or a country, the results are bombed hospitals, children orphaned by violence close by and far away. When fear and ignorance are in control, people die of preventable disease or starvation or exposure to the weather because they have no place to be. The fruit we bear, the lives we lead, the actions we take will be beautiful as we connect with the God who has made us and will not leave us. The wicked fruit comes as we forget, ignore, or reject the love that we are offered. When we take the evil that we might believe about ourselves and others and carry it out into behavior. We need to know that to give thanks and to love our God means living God's love planted in our hearts. That we need to grow it and flourish it through our decisions and our actions. And as Jesus says, thus, we will be known by our fruits. To the glory of God, ageless one, wellspring of life, Holy One. Amen.